The year is 2016. The age of virtual reality is already among us. No longer do you need to go outside to peer over buildings and have sensations of falling down. Alright, well, virtual reality isn't exactly where people want it to be yet, but we are quickly moving into what some would call the newest age of gaming. Some companies, however, don't seem to think making these large graphical leaps and wearing goggles on your face is better than focusing on more tried and true methods of gaming. Instead, they focus on highlighting stories, characters, and the narrative behind them. This is refreshing in an age of extremely large oceans with only puddles in depth. Obsidian was one of the companies who didn't get the memo about the next generation of gaming. No, Tyranny is an ode to the past, to what some people considered one of the greatest games of all time, Planescape Torment, and an extension of their previously released game, Pillars of Eternity. And there's nothing wrong with that. Pillars of Eternity, which launched not long ago, was another game by the Obsidian franchise and was Obsidian's return to CRPGs. This game was met with an unbelievable good reception. Still a bit crazy to think about in the big scheme of things, what with how the landscape looks these days. Although I was happy that it had success, as Obsidian is a favorite company of mine, and I definitely enjoyed how the story of the game came to life, what with the successful crowdfunding and all, I was simply not a fan of the game. Frankly, I found it to be boring. Regardless of the gameplay or any of the common complaints of CRPGs, my issues were with what I saw as a weak story. Perhaps it was the attempt of Pillars of Eternity to be a religious or theological sort of story that felt frankly dry and lifeless, much like my experience listening to sermons as a child. Even the characters were mostly lifeless. It just seemed like a random bunch of people plugged together for some journey.
For over 400 years, the armies of Kairos the Overlord have swept across the known world. All who stood against them fell before their might. Even the Archons, women and men of immense power, were forced to kneel, chained to the Overlord's will. Now Kairos' final conquest has come to our corner of the world, and two of the Overlord's armies compete for the honor of taking our lands. The elite disfavored, and the teeming horde of the Scarlet Chorus. The voices of Nerat, spymaster and Archon of secrets, guides the fierce and undisciplined masses of the Scarlet Chorus. With each battle, the Scarlet Chorus grows stronger, as the defeated are given a simple choice: serve or die. Graven Ash, Archon of War and the Overlord's most loyal general, leads the disfavored. Though small in number, Kairos' ironclad legion has never met true defeat in open battle. Watching over the two generals is Tunon, the Adjudicator, Archon of Justice, eldest of Kairos' minions. Tunon brings Kairos' laws to newly conquered lands, aided by the Fatebinders, judges and executioners of the Overlord's laws. You were among the youngest of the court of Fatebinders when Kairos' armies came to our lands. How could we have known that the fate of thousands would rest in your hands?
Tyranny, however, alleviates most of those issues by providing a very interesting premise that catches your attention from as early as the prologue or the Conquest phase of the game. The Conquest phase is a part of the game early on where you make decisions as a general of the Overlord's forces. Decisions that have ramifications and shape your story. This happens before you even step foot into the game. I'm a fan of choose your adventures, coming from my childhood reading those CYA books, and I think this is a feature that other RPGs most certainly could take inspiration from. You've seen glimpses of this sort of thing in games like Mass Effect and Dragon Age Origins in the form of backgrounds and origins, but Tyranny takes it a bit further. It lets you actually make active decisions to shape a more personal background experience, instead of just choosing a background and having it assumed, though you can still do that too. However, that's just an extra feature to the game and not the main attraction when it comes to building your background or character, as those options only really affect the dialogue part of the game. I would prefer that the decisions you make in the Conquest portion of the game have a little bit more apparent consequences and meanings, but some would argue that they prefer to have more mystery in the story, or at least more subtlety. This feature is much more in depth than the background and histories you choose at the start of character creation, and far better executed. The backgrounds and histories seem to noticeably have favorites, If the point of the game is to allow you to customize your history or origins as a general in Kairos' army, and have great choice over your decisions over the course of the game, then having backgrounds or histories that specifically only cater to certain story branches doesn't really seem like the most brilliant of ideas. Backgrounds or histories are a choice you make in character selection. This is before you reach the prologue Conquest portion I mentioned above. These backgrounds are before your time as Fatebinder in Kairos' Force. You have the choice between around half a dozen options, ranging from adopted by beasts, the story of a diplomat, or that of a war soldier. My first playthrough was a mage with the guild scholar background, my idea being I was some prodigy mage who was hungry for more knowledge and power. Naturally, I chose the story branch that let me take control of the Spire and bop the other two parties, the Scarlet Crusade and Disfavored, on the head. Wait a minute, you're letting me define my history through options in a prologue? That's great. But you're telling me the background title I chose means I should have allied with the old sages in the library instead of burning them all? Wait a minute. If choice is paramount, why are you forcing me to make certain choices before I even know that I need to make them? While I'm sure some min-maxers redid their characters after learning of that, not all of us have that level of patience or desire to, well, min-max their characters.
The year is 431, and Kairos' invasion has shattered all major opposition in the tiers. The Younger Realms, the Bastard Tier, the Free Cities. All who defied Kairos lay broken by battle, or bowed in surrender. The two armies of the Overlord, the Disfavored and the Scarlet Chorus, now control our lands. But our will is not yet extinguished. Not entirely. In the Valley of Vendrian's Well, those of us unwilling to bow to Kairos have banded together in defiance. Violating an oath of surrender from 2 years prior, we have staged a bloody uprising, murdering the Disfavored and Scarlet Chorus garrison in a midnight assault. With their main forces spread across the tiers, the Disfavored and Scarlet Chorus redeploy to Vendrian's Well to crush the resistance, but months pass with no definitive battle. As disagreement and discord paralyze the Archons, we bide our time and wait for our message of insurrection to spread across the tiers. The Overlord is not amused, and Kairos has one message for the Archons: crush the Oathbreakers or die. Kairos backs this threat with an edict, a magical commandment that can slay all in the valley should the order be ignored. The honor of proclaiming this edict fell to you.
Make no mistake though, the story in Tyranny is strong. It's about 30 to 40 hours of enjoyment, which might seem like small for an RPG, let alone CRPG, but Tyranny has a shorter story merely because it's more incentive to want to go back and play through the story, changing your decisions. I think this is a smart decision. There's no point in adding pointless filler to just make the game seem more like a complete game, especially when the biggest feature of the game is your ability to choose different paths of the story. Games that only last hours can be considered finished products. They just can't get away with being sold for a $60 price tag. Tyranny was sold at a $40 price tag, which seems to be the sweet spot for Obsidian. After beating the game, the first thing I did was had a thought of playing through the game again. I wanted to try different options. I wanted to see how the game differed. And the options I was able to make on my second playthrough were most definitely different than the ones I initially made. This is a very strong feature of the game. And this goes beyond the idea of only major decisions really mattering in the big scheme of things. I call this the illusion of choice. In Tyranny, you can attempt to get information or an object of power from an NPC, but if you handle it wrong, you end up losing their help no matter how much you try and fix it after. In games like Mass Effect, you can end up forcing or charming them almost no matter what in most situations. Mass Effect and the newer Dragon Age have the illusion of choice, where you feel like your decisions are mattering, but in reality, there's only really two options. And if you pick one, it's rather obvious to see what the other option would be. Those options also lock out other options. So once you choose your path, you're almost stuck with it. That's not how real choice works. Real choice is a fluid thing. Tyranny has multiple arcing storylines, and they are never stagnant like in the previously mentioned games. You could decide to help the Scarlet Crusade most of the way through the game, then decide to go tell them to eat sand or blood or whatever the Scarlet Crusade eats. It seems more like, well, real choice. Choice is when you get to be on the straight and narrow, and then decide to just tell everyone to screw off and ride on a unicorn. This is a refreshing take on the storytelling in video games, and hopefully one that others can take inspiration from. I would even say the sheer amount of choice in Tyranny is borderline overwhelming. But I am someone who enjoys the amount of control over my character. You have dialogue options that are not only affected by your history, as I previously stated, but also prologue options you chose. You then have certain dialogue modifiers, like subterfuge, athletics, and lore. Lore would be you demonstrating awareness, intelligence. Athletics was mostly you jumping over things and bashing people in the head with rocks. And subterfuge was a lot of bluffing or calling people out on their bluffing. These different features add a lot of flavor to the dialogue in the game and make it seem like your character's dialogue options and personality were shaped by actual choices you made in creating your character. Compared to games where you could just say certain things, but they didn't really feel like they were coming from the character that you created because they were just some pre-dialogue thing, but more the character that someone else created. This is fine if the game is a narrative-driven game, but when you tell someone they have the ability to make their own character and shape their own story, they should actually have the ability to shape their story. And that goes beyond the one or two major decisions at climax points of the game. This includes the small dialogue options, like ability to use your lore modifier to tell people that they're dumb, or use your subterfuge to call people out on their bull, or to use maybe decisions from your prologue that you made in the early Conquest phase of the game to tell people, hey, remember that time I helped you? That actually feels like you're playing the game. The setting of the game is very Obsidian. They have always been a company who likes to throw out the prim and perfect settings for more dark and bleak looking. Sometimes overly so, like my critique on the setting in KOTOR 2. But Tyranny doesn't suffer from that. In Tyranny, the evil forces have won, or at least that's what the advertisements say. It's a bit more complex than that, especially when there are sects and factions within the evil forces that are particularly morally evil, while maybe another is more evil by association. Some would be maybe a chaotic evil, while others would be what's called lawfully evil, which lawfully evil is sort of the idea of following rules and having order, but not just like random killing and such. Morality, as typical in Obsidian games, isn't some simple to understand concept. No, you might go into the game thinking, there's no way I would support the Scarlet Crusade, they seem like bad guys, and then get blindsided by the sheer stupidity of the disfavored in certain scenarios and want to rethink your opinion. You play as the Fatebinder, a sort of cardinal-like character sent out by Tunon, the Archon of Judgment, aka the Supreme Judge, to deal out Kairos, the Overlord's justice under the guidelines of law. The plot begins when you are sent out to deal with the squabbling Archons, which are near mythical figures who serve as leaders for their specific domain or armies. You can deliver justice however you see fit, especially with the help of a magical edict, which is a powerful spell in the form of a scroll or text that makes the squabbling Archons respect your wishes. Just know your actions have ramifications, and real ones. I'm not talking about the ones where your text pops up and says, so-and-so will remember this. No, like, you tried to screw us over, die type ramifications. Or they can be more subtle ones, which eliminate a companion from being part of your party. Although the motto of the game is the evil forces have won, the game is not about being evil, not necessarily. By all means, you can be the chaotic, evil person who kills people on a whim, but you will find that there are some story paths that allow you to help those that were crushed by Kairos' forces, aka you to some extent. These are the rebels. These groups can hate you due to your previous actions against them, or you can try and convince them to be on your side, which can sometimes be done through force or through charm. However, helping them isn't about being good necessarily. You can rationalize that helping them also helps you, and therefore could be done due to selfish reasons. But your rationalization isn't restricted to just, well, they're good guys, so I have to help them. These rebellious characters aren't what you would call traditionally good anyway, because traditionally good doesn't really exist in this game. Take for example one of the first groups you encounter. Before Tunon attempted to have them bend the knee, they were still very much a warlike and fighting amongst each other type tribe. But apparently when one evil overlord decides to take control of everyone, that's where they draw the line. Still, I really enjoy that although you are helping the rebels, which seems like the good option, you can still rationalize it in a completely selfish and even possibly evil way. The Archons are major characters in the story of Tyranny. There are a number of them, as Kairos, the Overlord, appoints them to reign over certain assets in particular, like Graven Ash, the Archon of War, Voices of Niret, the Archon of Secrets. Then there's the Archon of Justice, Tunon, who sends you on your journey, and some lesser known Archons. But you can't forget the Archon of Shadows, who seems to be the possibly most deadly of the Archons, the one who also seems to be the least known. Unfortunately for some, he's only available if you choose to neither assist Graven Ash nor the Voices of Niret. He's the wild card in the story. He really gives you that opportunity as a player to shake things up. That's part of the beauty of the game, though. You only really know about him if you choose the correct story path, and this is another reason the game has so much replay value to it, because each story path is unique and brings you to new locations and introduces new characters. Tyranny is a CRPG. The gameplay is top-down, and you can pause whenever you want and pick the abilities you want your characters or your companions to use. You build your characters by putting skill points into a set of skills and talent points into the talent tree you want to focus on. This is all pretty commonplace. However, Divinity Original Sins proved that you could take the typical boring CRPG combat and make it exciting by adding combo elements with characters in the environment. Tyranny attempted to add some combo ability, but it seems very bare bones. Why are the animations the same for certain combo abilities when I am a mage versus playing a warrior? The context doesn't really make sense if you watch some of the animations. It would have been nice if Tyranny added more of these gameplay aspects and fleshed them out. Just think of the stereotype of CRPGs and how they have this boring combat, and I think this is a lazy stereotype for companies like Obsidian to keep telling people. CRPGs are old, yes, they've been around for 2 decades. If you want to make a CRPG, can you at least create some unique mechanics to make it not so boring? The game doesn't need to be arcadey to be fun, but give it a new breath. Instead of the same old, then again the same old is consistent, and it works. So you won't run into many gameplay flaws, as long as you're fine with the same pause and click combat present in most of, if not all, CRPGs. Once I was able to get the taunt abilities for Barrack and heal abilities for Lantry, I was able to keep my companions both healed and protected quite easily. This allowed the third companion and myself to deal out damage rather safely. After that point, which is around the level 15 range, the game was a breeze even on hard mode. The wound system, seriously. This system is an abomination. Any system that penalizes you from playing the game is a flawed system. When you or your companions get to a certain low level of health, you get hit with a wound, at least on hard difficulty. On easier difficulties, you only get them if one of your characters falls unconscious. You have minor wounds, and then they kind of stack, and then you have major wounds. The more the wounds stack, the more severe they get, of course. The major wound doesn't really allow you to get your health past a certain point, unless you use your campfire to rest up. The amount of times you get brought to low health are pretty common early in the game, which means you constantly have to recover from being wounded by resting. This means you spend more time not playing the game and allowing your wounds to dissipate. This is a fantasy universe with magic in it. Why are we forcing pseudo-realism on players? Tyranny's combat also suffers from its monsters being redundant and overused. When you are in certain areas, you are fighting the same glowy wisps over and over again, and it makes the already boring combat even more boring. Although I was playing the game on a harder difficulty, I didn't see the point after a while. I wanted to play on an easier difficulty because I thought, well, the story, world, and characters were what I was enthralled by. I thought the gameplay was more fun than Pillars of Eternity was, however I really didn't think it was anything worth writing home about. As most experienced, I kept getting the load screen bug where the game takes 5 to 6 minutes to load a map that's smaller than a map you can near instantly load in Neverwinter Nights. This is typical of Obsidian games, but hopefully something is fixed in the upcoming patches or expansions. I found the companion characters to be more fun than my character was. For example, Ebb, a Tidecaster mage, which is a school of magic that focuses on harnessing the pull of the moon and the ability to manipulate water, is able to suspend herself in midair and rain death and healing down upon her enemies. She can also ricochet her abilities in another skill tree and teleport around the battlefield, draining her enemy's life force. Or how Kills in Shadow can pounce on foes and wield a two-hander like a one-hander. Tyranny does a fantastic job of giving you very useful and customizable companions, like most CRPGs, but in Tyranny the playstyles really fit the personality of the characters, which adds to the authenticity of the game. Not to mention the voice acting of the companion characters is surprisingly good.
At your service, Fatebinder. What do you need? If you insist, I'm a Scarlet Fury. That should raise some flags for you. It means that I'm good at killing, and more importantly, that I enjoy it. What, until then?
What is it you need? I'm still amazed we survived the Edict of Execution. The Chorus may outnumber us, and the disfavored seem to grow more aggressive every passing span. But we've endured our Neep days. The struggle now turns in our favor.
At your service. Of course. How can I help? Are you asking for an objective assessment? Or is this your way of saying you want to gossip? You must have some leverage over him, as I would have thought he'd lead us into a disfavored trap long ago. Or maybe the Legion is just that polite?
When they are voice acted, of course, which is not all of the dialogue, obviously, far more than Pillars of Eternity did, which is an upgrade. I found playing a mage to be quite possibly one of the most underwhelming roles of the game. The whole premise of a mage is essentially you start with bare bones spells and have to discover and learn how to craft certain spells. The spellcrafting mechanic is a cool one and lets you add certain effects to spells, but the system, much like the combat system that I mentioned previously, they just don't seem completed, really, or at least half fleshed out. If you let me choose the type of spell, an accent, or pattern that it fires, why can't I mix and match things? If you let people mix accents or spell effects, you can have more interesting experiences. Instead, you have a fire skull mixed with a lion accent, you shoot a fireball. Sure, you can add a shorter cooldown or more damage, but you can't really add much more to make it exciting. Why can't I do like a Tidecaller, propel myself in the air and rain down fire? Or breathing fire out of my mouth? I'm a powerful mage after all. In-game as a mage consisted of me just raining down AoE, but I found myself microing as Verse more, since I found her style to be more exciting to play. I even thought Lantry's offensive tree was more interesting. When the main mechanic of a class like a mage is finding the right spells, accent types, to create powerful spells, what you have is a mage using the same abilities over and over again until mid to end game where you can finally get the spells that you want. But then you realize the spells that you thought you wanted are as boring as the previous spells. They just do more damage, and maybe they have more AoE effects. This is a category where Divinity Original Sin just makes other RPGs look ancient. Even though the game has more of a turn-based style, the combat is very exciting in Divinity, because you can combine elements and have incredible combo potential. When you have to resort to being a damage turret as a mage, like in Tyranny, you're taking away the soul of what makes a mage exciting. A mage is exciting because you are essentially creating magic and matter out of thin air, able to rain down elements or turn people into frogs. It's almost an endless set of possibilities. I've seen very few games get this right, and Tyranny flat out just doesn't. I didn't find anything particularly notable about the art style in the game. It's good enough to not take away from your immersion. However, if you play a male character, I would advise keeping a helmet on and trying not to zoom in on your character models. The in-game models look fine from a distance, but when you look at your character on the character panel, you look like some sort of Frankenstein monster with your chin being the size of a granite block. Female characters look much better, however, which is why I chose to go with one. The armor styles are lacking, but this is sort of expected in CRPGs. I haven't really seen many CRPGs give you enough variety and coolness in the armor and looks. CRPGs tend to focus more on the customization of your actual character, not the things that he or she wears and fights with. I found the ability to customize your character's look in the game to be just severely lacking. I can live with my character creation options not being out of this world, but not having a set of armor I can feel cool wearing. My mage always seemed like he was wearing some Weasley handed down robes. Damn it, Weasleys. While Barrick in the game gets to wear some nightmarish, cool-looking armor set, it might not be your style, but at least it's distinctive and it's cool to look at. If you look at most Obsidian games, however, they typically lack the ability to customize your appearance. Well, if you don't count the mods in Neverwinter Nights. If you can get past the mostly forgettable combat in Tyranny, and the at times repetitive monsters, you have an incredibly well-crafted game. Every character has their own motivations, and they make sense. Companions are memorable enough and have playstyles that fit their personalities. Factions are at war, and it's hard for you to choose sides, but the best sort of choice is when you can say neither to the two main options given. Tyranny gives you the chance by allowing you two separate story branches, then assisting either the Scarlet Crusade or the Disfavored. The political intrigue in Tyranny is, well, intriguing. You really have the potential to shake things up. The setting makes sense, it's not glitz and glamour, some scenes or stories are brutal, but the game gives no illusions about it being some superhero archetype of a story. No. Tyranny is a game of deception, death, and depth. Although the ending is what some would call abrupt, and certainly is set up in a way to sell an expansion or some major patch, I don't think it was particularly bad. It's not like we won't see more Tyranny content, and the game already lasted 3 acts at that point. If they were going to end it somewhere, it made sense for them to end it at a point that made you eager to play the game again. The art style is shaky in close-ups, but it looks good enough from a distance that it doesn't take away from the gameplay. Tyranny gives you the ability to really customize your character's backstory, the way you handle both dialogue and the story as the game progresses. At all points of the game, you have a plethora of options and decisions to make or take. Certainly some stories are a bit more exciting than others, but the beauty of the game is that your decisions and how you want to handle things is very vast. You have tons of opportunities. And with a short game time, 30 to 40 hours, you have plenty of time and opportunities to replay the game. You don't have to slog through too much introduction to be able to get to the meat of the game, which is conversing with characters, companions, and making decisions that affect you, your companions, and the entire story. If you are playing this game expecting some revival of combat in the CRPG, I would hold out for the sequel of Divinity Original Sin. But if you know Obsidian's titles like Fallout New Vegas and KOTOR 2, and enjoy their ability to craft well thought out stories and characters, I would most certainly buy this game. As always guys, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. Comment why you did like it, maybe you didn't like it. If you disagree, let me know in the comments below. And as always, nerdSlayer out.